NBC's Ryan Nobles is on Capitol Hill. Also with us, NBC News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Andrea Mitchell and Jeff Mason, Reuters White House correspondent. So, Jeff, how are President Biden's domestic challenges impacting the stakes, the conversations that we're hearing for U.S. allies?
Yeah, forgive the noise in the background. I think there's some lawn mowing going on here at the White House. But to your question, Chris, it is absolutely hanging over this NATO summit, which is a really important summit for President Biden, not least because of the fact that he's pushing for additional support for Ukraine, and this is a huge part of his legacy during his first term as president, and in general, his legacy as a leader. So it is an argument, I think, that the Biden campaign would say for his reelection, what he's doing here at the NATO summit, and it is no doubt unwelcome to him that questions about his mental acuity, questions about his ability to do the job now, let alone questions about his ability and support to stay in the race as the Democratic standard bearer are hanging over him. But they are, and those questions will no doubt come up in the press conference tomorrow, and are questions that we're asking of the foreign leaders who are meeting with him. Because, as I think has been said on your air already today, every speech, every press conference, every meeting, everything that President Biden does right now is being closely scrutinized because of that poor debate performance.
And generally, last night, the reviews I saw of the president's speech, Ryan, were that he was very forceful, particularly talking about Russia. Ukraine is in the spotlight right now, and President Zelensky is trying to make the most of it. So, Ryan, what can you tell us about his visit to Capitol Hill?
Yeah, well, just a few minutes ago, President Zelensky left a room after a meeting with a group of bipartisan senators, both Republican and Democrat, including the highest-ranking members of the United States Senate, including Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and the Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. And, you know, this was designed as a way to show Zelensky that the United States Congress has his back, because, of course, there's been a lot of dissension among Republicans in particular about whether or not the United States should continue to fund the war effort in Ukraine. And while there was some division around that, ultimately, Republicans and Democrats did come together to push through this latest funding package to make sure that Ukraine was taken care of. But there is a great deal of uncertainty as to what would happen if the election results go in a different direction. Donald Trump enters the White House and Republicans take control of either both the Senate and the House, or one or the other. And so part of the conversation had to have been between Zelensky and these leaders, like, what if? What could happen if power changes hands? Many of the leaders that I've talked to have said that there is enough funding, at least in the short term, to provide Ukraine the funding and the effort and the equipment that they need. The question is the long-term issue as to how long this slog could be with Russia. And those are some of the questions Zelensky is likely asking these congressional leaders during his meetings today.
Andrea, whatever happens in November, Joe Biden is president for the next 6-7 months, right? So how important is this summit for Zelensky? And I should add that the members of Congress are members of Congress until the change in next January.
Well, it's all important. And in fact, I've never heard Zelensky. I've covered him in Munich. I've covered him elsewhere. And last night's speech was so interesting. First of all, he chose the Reagan Institute to do it. He was reaching out to Republicans. He chose Bret Baier, our colleague from Fox, to do the Q&A afterwards, which was very important. He answered political questions about Donald Trump, but importantly about the military aspects of it, in quoting from Ronald Reagan's speeches and having Mitch McConnell introduce him. It was very targeted, and he complained about the administration's policies. He complained about the U.S. policies restricting his ability to go 150 kilometers, 500 kilometers to attack the bases where those jets are taking off and bombing his cities. And he said that basically they can't compete with that it's great to get the Patriots. Now, belatedly, he pointed out they're still waiting for those F-16s that were announced again today, but stuff has not been delivered. But that 5 new Patriots are not going to protect someplace, like a city like Kharkiv, where 3,500 missiles have hit them, and that they simply cannot compete with the Russian air attacks. And made it very clear. And in just talking to officials here, it's clear that that is a U.S. decision. The administration's fear that it will escalate if he goes deep into Russia. Republicans, Mike Turner was just here on our program, Republican Intel Chair, saying that that's a bad decision, that Stoltenberg is against that decision, and the other NATO countries, including the Brits now, are against that decision, and that's one big conflict between the U.S. and Zelensky that could be resolved this week.
What are the chances, Ryan, that gets resolved this week?
It's decision-making on that. If they're going to satisfy Zelensky's concerns and, to be totally, balanced here, it was the Republicans who held up that supplemental for 6 months, and that's that turning point that we saw in February. The world, including Zelensky, were all gathered. I was there in Munich at the security conference. That's when they lost so much ground. They lost Avdiivka. That's when he warned that they were going to have to retreat. That's when they began to lose those villages in the north. And then it was Kharkiv coming under fire, and now the worst battering of Kyiv. He said, actually, in that interview yesterday, when asked by Bret Baier, how did you as a father feel when the children's hospital was bombed? He said, as a father, as the president, we hate to see that kind of loss. He said, we wanted to kill Putin at that moment.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.